Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and welcome to the first episode of our Star Wars month. I'm Chris Garner, joined by my co-host Tayte in the Hour, and George, you're back.
Hey!
You're back for the Star Wars ones. Hopefully, I don't know how our schedules are going to line up, but hopefully we can get you back on all the other Star Wars ones. So yeah, we're about 12 days away from The Force Awakens right now as we record this, and we're celebrating the release of a brand new Star Wars film by devoting the entire month of December to everything involving the galaxy far, far away and all the films. As this is our first episode, we'll be kicking off with the infamous and much derided Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, directed by, written by, and pretty much dictated by George Lucas. So what's going to be interesting about this review in particular is that near enough every other movie reviewer I can think of has at some point done a review of Phantom Menace or the prequels in general, the most famous of which is probably Red Letter Media's reviews of the prequels, the Mr. Plinkett reviews, who basically cover absolutely every single minute point about those entire films. So we're going to try and do something a bit different. Obviously, we'll touch on the usual parts like Jar Jar and the plot inconsistencies, characters and things like that, but I don't know, I wanted to make this one a bit more personal because I don't know about you guys, but Phantom Menace was the first ever Star Wars film I saw.
Yeah, it's going to be, for a start, it's going to say it's very hard to do this because there's three of us talking, so I don't know how I'm going to jump into stuff. But this wasn't just the first Star Wars film, this was my first ever film at the cinema. I proceeded to see it 7 times, age of 2/3, and basically, I think, Chris, you know the story that it just happened, and Tayte, it's a long one, but I won't overdraw it. But for this review, I do have in front of me a bottle of Jack Daniels and a shot glass, and I've had 2 already. And I'm preparing for the Christmas party tonight, but this is the best timing way to do a review of The Phantom Menace.
Definitely, and you know, probably still need that bottle for Attack of the Clones. Maybe not quite as much for Revenge of the Sith, but Tayte, can you remember seeing this for the first time, or what age you were when you went to see it?
Yeah, this wasn't my first Star Wars film that I ever saw. My parents raised me properly and made me watch the originals first. Not sure how your parents treat you, George, but
they'd never seen it. I mean, I was only 2 when it came out, and apparently the story is we're at a shop or somewhere. For some reason, my parents have both never seen any of the 3, which is ludicrous to me.
Oh my god!
Yeah, and they weren't exactly young; they're in their like 30s when I was born. And then apparently I picked up a book. I kept picking up. So they said, "Okay, we'll go watch it at the cinema." Then everything changed. And like to be fair, they both liked them. It probably helped that they hadn't grown up with the originals, or they'd have probably despised the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
But it's different, but it's kind of weird.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I was 6 years old when this came out. I think this came out in the May, didn't it? Because all the Star Wars films, apart from Force Awakens, usually come out around the closest Saturday, is it, to May the 4th or something like that?
This one was May 19th.
Oh, okay. But because I was that young and I hadn't seen Star Wars before, I didn't get the sense of the hype surrounding it. Like, I can't even imagine the fans that grew up with the original trilogy and, you know, this got first announced. I mean, I remember when, for us now, the equivalent of that was probably with Force Awakens, where we heard that Disney initially bought the rights, and then since then it's just been non-stop Star Wars news to the point where we're almost at the film's release. But when you're sort of that age, you don't really pick up on all that stuff. You just sort of go and see the film. You don't have about 11 TV spots or the internet at your disposal. You sort of maybe see a trailer in the cinema and then you go and see the movie. And in all honesty, this being the first Star Wars film I ever saw, I absolutely loved this film. And I can remember for years after, you know, I'd be on the school playground and fighting over whether we wanted to be Darth Maul, Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon. And that's, like, thinking back now, that's where I really recall the huge merchandise push of Star Wars, because, I mean, Phantom Menace stuff was everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I personally never really had the experience in cinema or anything of going to see The Phantom Menace. I was a young'un. I watched it on video cassette a couple of years after it came out, and personally the first Star Wars film from the new lot I saw was Attack of the Clones in cinema, and then I went back to go watch Phantom Menace. But if I remember it right, the first time I watched it, I didn't think it was that bad. I knew that some people, it was getting backlash in the news and stuff like that. There was whole news stories on how much backlash it was getting. Like, I remember there being an article on someone who was in the cinema massive Star Wars fan, went to the opening night premiere in London, and they basically looked at George Lucas, shook their head, and walked out halfway through. So,
Ooh.
yeah, I know. Like, stories about like that. I mean, it's crazy to think about that. Like,
George Lucas
back
doesn't
then,
care because he
like,
got the money.
backlash. No, definitely shows in Attack of the Clones, but I quite liked it.
With this, I won't lie. This was my favourite film of the. Well, actually, no. When I saw it, obviously, it was the only one I saw. But growing up, I always loved Return of the Jedi, followed by the Phantom Menace. This is Until the Age. I can't remember the year, but I'm going to grade it in up till the release of Episode 3. That I always of the Phantom Menace had all the Legos, all the toys, all of it. So this was massive. But it was always Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back. This is until Attack of the Clones. I always hated Attack of the Clones when I was younger. I'd always start the DVD on the Droid Factory. I was never big on it. Growing up, obviously, if I watch it nowadays, I haven't done it in 2.5 years though, I'll always start from the beginning like you should do. But the Phantom Menace was massive to me, and until the internet, and probably until about 5 or 6 years ago, I'd never encountered someone that disliked these films. So I think when you slowly hit the age where suddenly the whole world hates them, it was quite confusing for me. But you get an understanding of why, and you start to acknowledge it. And then just naturally, as you get older, I dislike the prequels more. I like the old films more. And the more I got into film, the old ones get better and better, and the prequels get more disappointing to a degree. But it's a shame. But growing up, I love this film, so it's going to be very interesting reviewing it.
Yeah, and I think as you get older, you sort of start to enhance that sort of analytical mind, don't you? Like you talk about. I mean, you're at a film college, aren't you, George? And you can sort of like deconstruct films quite a lot. And looking at them now, they are absolutely rife with problems. But when you're young and you watch the film, you sort of see it through a lot more innocent eyes, really, don't you? I mean, this film was a marketing genius. I mean, this is spoken about in the Plinkett reviews, but I mean, you've got a young Anakin who's sort of the age near enough that I saw it for the first age, so he was a character I identified with. And then you've got Jar Jar, who's the comic relief for the really, really little kids. And I'm going to be honest, I'm one of these horrible people. When I was that age, I thought Jar Jar was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And I loved him. Honestly, I know. I feel really bad for saying that just about myself. And then again, I mean, even people still say this now. Darth Maul was one of the coolest things you'd ever see. And I'll still stand by that Darth Maul is awesome. Although his character is light, he doesn't get many lines. And I think one of the biggest problems people say about these films is that he should have been the overarching villain between all of the prequels. And having rewatched this a few days ago, yeah, it is kind of anticlimactic how they offed him really quick at the first film. I know in the grand scheme of the canon, with like the Clone Wars and things like that, he comes back, he has the robot legs, he has his brother Savage Opress, but if you're just going by the films, which you should, the way he was offed really quickly, I think definitely hurt these prequels, because I think he could have developed into an equal villain to the likes of Darth Vader.
Exactly, and this is the sort of Kylo Ren debate, briefly looking at Episode 7. If the way we've done, none of us could hype up this film. Imagine us waiting 16 years for Episode 1. We never did. We never really waited for Episode 7. We've all wanted it. When it got announced, we're all at the age when, okay, we're going to remember every single bit of hype we've had about this film. If Kylo Ren is to die in Episode 7, I think we'll all be livid, just in the sense that he's been hyped up so much. So it's looking back at things like that, I get why they were fuming Darth Maul died. Growing up, I didn't mind it. I thought it was cool. I still love Darth Maul, but it was really cool to the story of Obi-Wan. But it's kind of got these sense of things where you look at it in contrast to what they're doing now, and you kind of think they're not going to make this mistake. So I've kind of got this hope in my mind in the back. So just briefly, as my point of the prequels is that I think Kathleen Kennedy and JJ have used them to right an Episode 7 from making the same errors.
You'd hope.
Yeah,
that.
and then yeah, we don't know how the film's going to be. I'm hopeful for it, but I think that's one of the arguments you can have. Like, would we have a Force Awakens if we hadn't have had a Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith? Because before this film, Star Wars was just untouchable. Like, each one of the three is fantastic. I know some people have problems with sort of like the halfway point in Return of the Jedi regarding the Ewoks. But I mean, I even love Return of the Jedi. That's honestly probably one of my favourites of the original trilogy. But when this came out, I think even people that saw it for the first time, and you hear stories of people who went to see this film about 13 times, they were sort of tricking themselves to try and like it. You know, go to see a Star Wars film and everyone talks about the opening crawl where it talks about politics and taxation of trade routes and everything like that. And the problem I have with this film is that, well, I have a lot of problems with this film, but at its core is that if you're viewing this as episode 1, if you are going in sort of chronological order of the numbers, it really doesn't serve as an effective introduction into the Star Wars world, I don't think. You're just sort of like thrown into the middle of this situation with the Trade Federation, and you really don't know what Jedis are or what their rules are or doctrine or anything like that. You're just sort of thrown into the middle of the situation, whereas the original Star Wars, again, you've got Rebels, Empire, and it sets it right up there with your villain. So I think that the start of this film really needed an effective introduction, but then again, you will always run into that problem. I mean, you had this with the Hobbit films as well. When you do a prequel so many years after, you know, the previous trilogy, you're always going to run into that problem of doing something completely new and also paying homage to the originals and, you know, sort of setting that stuff up.
I think, speaking of The Hobbit, that's the kind of modern example to us. I like Lord of the Rings, but I was never massive on it. But the disappointment so many people I know have had with The Hobbit is the modern decade-on replica of what went wrong with the prequels. But as far as the introduction goes, it's quite interesting because obviously this was my introduction to Star Wars and it was cool. But it's only once you hit that sort of 11, 12-year-old age is when I realised, you know, how great the originals are, but also I've kind of got to think that they do a lot of right. I mean, we'll go into Phantom Menace briefly, right at the end, you know, they bring in the rule of two and the term Sith's used, and there's some things that Lucas uses which are great. There is a lot of... The Phantom Menace is more mythology building, I'd say, the prequels, than sort of Star Wars building. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys.
Yeah.
A lot of what they do, you know, are the backstory further beyond that, Plagueis, all of it. So there's a lot of credit to some ways, but, you know, you can't ignore the obvious horrendous ways.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I want to sort of ask you guys this question. You talk about when you get older, you sort of, your love for this film dwindled as the years went on. Did you find that when you had these on video, I remember a time when I just had Phantom Menace on the video shelf next to the original trilogy, you'd find yourself watching this one less and less? Because when I'm trying to think back to the tender age of 6 watching this film and what things I liked. At the time, I liked Jar Jar, and then honestly, I mean, the pod race was okay, but then I think everyone could admit that the final fight is awesome and still holds up. I know it's very overly choreographed and doesn't really have any of the emotion or, you know, emotional stakes like the original fights did, but if you're just watching it from like a pure... It's almost like a dance when you watch it, and the music, we'll touch on the music later on, but Duel of the Fates, one of the best Star Wars pieces of music out of all 6 films. So as a kid, I'd always sort of gravitate towards that stuff more, and more the look of the characters and everything like that, rather than the actual themes and story of it. Now, Tayte, I know you said that you grew up watching the originals first, so did you have like a crushing disappointment when you went to see this film, or did you also sort of embrace it?
Well,
and then did you find yourself watching it less and less as you got older?
Well, I understood very early on that, like, there's no way you're going to be able to get rid of this film. I mean, I quite liked it when I was younger, and when I rewatched it recently, I thought, do you know what? People give this so much stick when actually it isn't bad. It's aged quite well, this film, besides from the JJ element of it, which hopefully JJ Abrams will definitely either kill him off or just not feature him in the film. I'd love a public execution on screen, but seeing as it's going to be a PG, I highly doubt that's going to happen.
I heard rumours that a while back he wanted to show Jar Jar's skeleton in the deserts of Jakku. I really hope something like that happens, but it probably won't.
No, I want a full-on.
Like that would be great.
I want a full-on public brutal beheading. Just this is the end of the George Lucas era. Wait, my name's Jar Jar. Who is this George Lucas? But But,
or if you believe the internet, just quickly, Jar Jar Binks is the real deal. He is, you know, the big bad new Emperor Wrath, because the internet's always right.
Darth Jar Jar will return.
And you know what? Now we've brought up Jar Jar, we may as well get onto him, because he is sort of the poster boy for everything wrong with the Star Wars prequels, and
Actually, no. I'm going to have to disagree with you there, because the person who played young Anakin took a lot of the heat, and it completely destroyed his acting career.
Jake Lloyd, yeah.
It's destroyed him. I mean, did you see his mugshot from his car chase this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, he looks like Darth Vader should be. I'll give him that. Secondly, every single headline was this is pod racing, which I can't fault. That is absolutely brilliant. But from a non-nasty way, it really has ruined him. But you know, he was just a kid. You wouldn't turn down being in Star Wars.
And like, I rewatched it, and yeah, sure, he's a kid. What do you expect? He's a child actor. Have you ever seen an Oscar-winning performance from a child actor?
Yeah.
They expected
And I mean,
so highly of him.
he was a child actor expected to read the lines like "Are you an angel?" and everything like that. Which, honestly,
Yeah.
watching it back, I thought it at the time. The age difference between Natalie Portman and Jake Lloyd in this film is uncomfortable to watch. It's so
No,
bad.
We'll
I
talk,
know
we'll
when-
talk about that when it gets to Attack of the Clones.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But just when they're sort of having this semi-flirting dialogue, it's just really. I was just like squirming in my seat watching it. But all the hate going on Jake Lloyd, yeah, it is unwarranted, because I don't know if any of you have seen it, and we can talk about it more when we get to like the direction and George Lucas himself. But there's about an hour-long behind-the-scenes making-of Phantom Menace. I think you can watch it on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's on the DVD. And you just watch it, and the whole production to me looked like a train wreck. And it's when they're casting the role for Anakin, they've got 3 kids that they've whittled it down to, and they always do the screen test of the "Are you an angel?" scene. And the second kid was fantastic, and you could see that sort of element of darkness that could like be unearthed as the years went on. But they went with Jake Lloyd, and you just see he's just, he's a kid. He was what? Was he 9 years old when he did this role? Or 8 probably when they started production?
Yeah, he would have
so
been
you
9
can't-
when they were filming.
Yeah, so you can't blame him, and I mean, I'm trying to think of all the films he did. I can think of this and probably Jingle All the Way, and that's all I can think of. It is a shame what happened, but he is definitely not the biggest problem in this film. And I would actually say there are some scenes where he's not too bad. The scene where he sort of leaves his mother and he says bye to her and he walks off and the classic Binary Sunset theme plays. I still think that scene holds up pretty well. It's mostly just the dialogue, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues with not just this, the whole of the prequel trilogy, is the script. And we all know that George Lucas isn't the best of writers. You know, once he got to The Empire Strikes Back, he had to recruit... Sorry, I've completely forgotten his name. Lawrence Kasdan.
Yeah.
He had a draft done by a screenwriter who I've forgotten her name, who passed away. And he knew writing wasn't his thing. So then coming into the prequels, he asked Lawrence Kasdan, can you help me do it? Now, Lawrence Kasdan said, no, these are your films. At this point, either Lawrence Kasdan knows what Lucas's plan is and doesn't want anything to do with it, or Lawrence Kasdan just doesn't want to do it. And I think, unfortunately for Lucas, he got himself into a situation where he hired a yes-man producer, Rick McCallum, who, to me, is almost at fault as much as Lucas is, for no control over his director or anything like that. And it just showed in the writing. But seriously, if you took the concepts of each of these films and you could have put an A-list writer on them, you know, there'd be some incredible moments, and they'd probably be 100 times better, because they don't look bad, they sound bad. And by sound, that doesn't mean John Williams, that means the voices that we hear on screen.
Absolutely, and I might be the only one who thinks this, but out of all the 3 prequels, I think that this one is the best visually. It's got that really good blend of CGI and practical effects. I know there is an overuse of CGI which comes more into it later on, especially with like the pod race aliens and some of the creatures and everything like that. But honestly, some of those like landscape shots that were all digital, like the over the head shot of the pod race before they all set off, Theed Palace, stuff like the underwater city, Otto Gunga, it all looks great. And when you get to sort of Attack of the Clones and 3, I think that's where they overused it loads with even the backgrounds and stuff. But if you're looking at this one purely visually, I think this is definitely, head and shoulders above the other 2.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I've watched all 3 of them extremely recently. And, like, I was watching the third one and I was like, yeah, that's cool, but I could definitely tell that it was all CGI and literally no practical effects anymore. With the second film, it was barely practical effects. I think they used it in one scene and one scene alone. And I just thought, God, what happened, man? I mean, this year we've had proof that practical effects can be put towards a film and make it one of the best films of the year.
Definitely.
So I do hope, like, I know in this new film they're doing some practical effects, aren't they?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
there's
a big
lot
push
of
for it.
Loads. And I'm really looking forward to it on that element alone. But something that I did notice in the first of this trilogy, what are we calling this? The saga? Is it the Star Wars saga?
Yeah,
Star Wars saga,
that's
all
what they
6
go
films,
with,
yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, anyway. The prequels. The aliens, the Trade Federation.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems that I do have with this film, aside from the whole Jar Jar and stuff like that. The Trade Federation. I'm not sure whether they're racist or not, in the way that
they are.
portrayed them.
Oh, they are, absolutely. Newt Gunray, and I forgot the name of the other guy who dresses in the black robe.
But they sound like
absolutely,
sound like South Park's rendition of Chinese people. I'm not going to lie, but the recent series of South Park with their voices when they're trying to do the whole city walk thing, it is genuinely like I'm just watching there. I'm thinking, oh, they've got to have voiced this scene. Come on.
Yeah, and when you look back, it is kind of cringeworthy. I mean, everyone knows the whole thing with Jar Jar, but absolutely with the Trade Federation, and even with Watto as well. Yeah, you kind of watch it now, and it is almost uncomfortable to watch how bad it is. I'm sure. Well, I'd fear for it if it was, but I'm sure that wasn't George Lucas's intention. But that is absolutely how it comes across on screen. Yeah.
That's why I can't get over this shitty comment. I love South Park so much. Watto definitely is a case for well, that's been the most spoken about, and then you can jump into Attack of the Clones, and they've even put the little hat on him.
Yeah.
I don't think he intended it, but surely someone on that set in production, a digital artist or anything, could have said, "Wait a minute," but no, they didn't predict it. I just think it was just Lucas being a bit, not nasty, just a bit dumb and innocent.
Yeah.
Just a lack of thought from anyone in the creative process. But the Trade Federation, yeah, definitely. But I now can't unthink of the Shitty Walk Chicken Man being a part of the Star Wars board.
Hello, welcome to Skywalker. Can I help you?
It's like, can I take your order, please? It's like Shitty Walk Chicken, Shitty Walk Beef. Oh, I just love that program. So everyone knows, like, I've missed the cinema since Spectre. I've been beyond on everything, podcast, everything. The only thing I'm up to date with is South Park, and that's because it's the greatest production in the history of mankind.
Oh, imagine them directing a Star Wars episode. Or a Star Wars
watch
parody.
that.
Just a Star Wars parody episode.
It'd be like a double act of the two people at the cantina that Ben Kenobi, or, you know, the he doesn't like you. You could picture like South Park doing like an origin for them. Oh, it'd be brilliant.
Well, you know, they've got, I forgot the names, the guys who did Lego Movie are doing the Han Solo one. Hopefully, give it a few years when they've run out of Star Wars characters to do spin-offs on, and Trey Parker's still around, we might get that one. But we're talking about the huge racism in this movie. We've put it off long enough. Let's discuss Jar Jar. As I said, when I was 6 years old, it was all about Jar Jar for me. Jar Jar and Darth Maul were the two greatest characters in this film. I feel really bad because I was one of these just bratty kids that wanted to try and get as many Star Wars toys as I could, and my poor dad had to travel ages to get me. It was a Jar Jar money box. There was 4 of them. You could get an Obi-Wan one, Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Maul, and there's a Jar Jar one.
Do you still have that Jar Jar money box?
I
still have it in the loft. Yeah.
Do you want to smash it up on stream now?
No, that's the thing. Like, even though it's Jar Jar is the most hated character of Star Wars, and the prequels aren't great, there's still an attachment I have to the merchandise because begrudgingly, he is still part of the Star Wars franchise, and I can't bring myself to break it. But what they're on sort of like a black base, and you put the money in, and I think Jar Jar, I swear he like danced to the Cantina song from A New Hope. And I forced my poor dad to get this. I had a Jar Jar inflatable chair. I remember that. It was just all about Jar Jar, and now you get older, and yeah, he is incredibly annoying. Huge mistakes were made to the point where, in all honesty, he probably gets the most screen time in the movie, or up there with like Anakin or something, because Anakin really only comes into it until about 45 to 50 minutes into the movie. But he's definitely sort of the big push. I mean, he comes into it in what, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes into the movie, and then he sort of tags on with them the entire movie.
Yeah.
I've heard rumours that the initial concept for Jar Jar was to be sort of more of a grizzled war general.
Oh, come on. That would have been
just
so much better.
Yeah, you just look at stories like that and you sort of sigh and shake your head at what could have been. But I guess this was sort of the more extreme equivalent of what the Ewoks were to fans of Return of the Jedi. I know people always say there's a cut-off point with Return of the Jedi. If you were before a certain age, you love the Ewoks. If you were just over that point, everyone hates them. And to me, I think the Gungans are more of an extreme version, and similar to what the Ewoks were in Return of the Jedi.
Well,
Speaking of, do you want me to go first?
No, you go first.
I'd like to describe a piece of merchandise I own. It's in my garage. There's a gigantic backpack, right? And it is Jar Jar Binks' face. It is like 3D, so there's a normal backpack, but then there's a nose, there's the ears, there's the eyes, there's a mouth, there's all of it. And there's also
I have that as well.
Why haven't you burned those yet?
Because they're like my childhood. Like,
yeah.
They're great. I can't bin them. They're hilarious now. Like, if I took it to, I'm tempted to take it to Celebration next year, see what dirty looks like it. But that'd be great.
Oh no, dude, take it to the midnight premiere.
Oh, that's tempting. I might now.
Like get some duct tape and like strap it round your face and just go as Jar Jar.
You know what?
No, I think I know those backpacks you're on about. The Darth Maul one was sort of like squidgy
Black.
felt, wasn't it? If I remember rightly.
It's
there
like
was a C-3PO one and Chewbacca one as well, I think.
You can't put anything in it. There's literally no room in the backpack, but it is gigantic.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Like, as I was talking about, like the merchandise earlier, there was just so much of it. Phantom Menace. Probably my favourite memories of the toys I had were, it was sort of like a walkie-talkie, and they released the toys with a little voice chip that you could attach to the feet and sort of waft over it, and they'd say a collection of lines that they had from the movie. It was absolutely just everywhere, and we're seeing that now. With Disney, obviously, with The Force Awakens, just every single thing you can think of, they've probably got it. A lunchbox. There's even like an R2-D2 desk vacuum that we saw when the toys first went on sale. It's absolutely everywhere. But when you're a kid, you're sort of innocent to it because it's all Star Wars to you and it's all good. But now you're older, it's just like the Disney cash cow, just like churning the machine to try and bleed every single bit of money out of Star Wars fans. And you know what? It's working because I'm still buying Star Wars stuff. There's loads of stuff I want but can't have.
Yeah.
But that's just, I think that's what it's all about, though. It's the hype, isn't it? It sort of brings you a bit closer to the film, man. I don't know if you're a collector, Tate, but I know, George, you collect the Black Series and tons of other Star Wars stuff as well. When people ask you, do you have friends that sort of like shake their head at you and say, like, why are you spending that much on Star Wars?
Well,
it's very difficult to explain.
I have to kind of tell you, I just went to town and I just bought a pair of Darth Vader cufflinks. So
nice.
I think that my friends are actually okay with Star Wars stuff. Like, I mean, one of my friends has a I think it was a 1:4 replica of a Millennium Falcon made out of Lego. Or something like that. It's huge. It's absolutely massive. It takes up like an entire room in his house, and he had to dismantle it a couple of years ago. But like, I love Star Wars. My friends love Star Wars. It was never really a problem for us. I mean, I feel like it is probably the most successful toy franchise of all time to come from a movie. And I know that this year they've already made almost all of their money back from the film, just in toy sales, pre-release sales. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think with my mates, everyone knows I'm into it. Like, people at work who I don't really speak to, they all know I love Star Wars. So I think to a lot of people I don't chat to a lot, I'm just that Star Wars fan, which is, you know, cool by them. And then I've got some of my close mates who, the way I've sold everything to them is that it's an investment, literally, right? I've got the Fallout 4 Pip-Boy. My phone's too big, so I can't actually use it. And all my friends are into Fallout, like, oh my god, it's amazing. And all my friends goes, why'd you get it? And I was like, because mate, it's going for 150 quid on eBay. What's not to like? And what's epitomised is these magazines, because obviously they're only at Sainsbury's, that's where I work. It's literally heaven. So everyone's coming and goes, oh, you're buying more of them? I was like, yeah. And then I made more money, and I'm the one that's laughing at them. But I think it's interesting because the mates that I know, they all know I love it, and my lecturers know that. But it's what's been interesting is one of my sort of casual mates who I've been showing the films to. She's kind of getting why I love it, but in the sense that she's not really bothered, because I think at the end of the day everyone's got something they were obsessed with growing up, mine just happened to resurface at a price tag of $4 billion from Disney.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing about Star Wars as well, isn't it? And this was touched in the book by Chris Taylor, How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, that even someone who hasn't seen Star Wars, they know of it. They can probably tell you a few characters' names. If you show them a picture of the Death Star, Millennium Falcon, Stormtrooper, they know instantly what it's from. So it's just so into our pop culture now. It's just always has been. And like, I will say that film-wise, I prefer stuff like Lord of the Rings. Like, that's just, in terms of films, that's what I prefer. But there's just something about Star Wars that's never been captured in any films, in that it's like a legacy, isn't it? Like, it spans generations, literally. Like, my parents went to see the original Star Wars when it came out in 1977. Then I went to see them in 1999, and then when we go and see this one, I'm sure there'll be brand new fans that are just getting into it as well. So I think that's one of the greatest things about Star Wars, including the prequels as well. Because as I said, this is what got me into Star Wars. I'm sure at some point I would have seen the originals, obviously, but would they have had the same effect on me if I hadn't have seen this first? I don't know. But if you want to get into the film a bit more now, we can sort of talk about some of the characters and the actual plot itself, because this plot is sort of all over the place, really. It definitely ramps up the whole political stance of it all. I mean, we see new things like the Jedi Council, but even that, I'm sure that is not what fans of the originals expected when they went in to see this movie. They're very sort of monk-like, very monotone, and that's honestly one of the biggest problems I have with this movie, watching it again. I was sort of like just slamming my head into the back of the chair when I was watching it. It's so boring. Like, every scene just sort of moves along, and like characters just stand there and deliver dialogue, and then it cuts to the next scene. It is a very, very plodding movie, and honestly, I wasn't really getting into this film until about the last 10-15 minutes, where you have the Naboo space ending coupled with the retaking of Theed Palace and the Gungan War and Duel of the Fates. Up until that point, it's such a drag, this film, watching it again.
I didn't mind it. I really
didn't mind it?
There was something about Star Wars where it is an action film, but there's always something else going on. So in the original series, it was the Force kind of controlling the background. We've already learned about the Force. We know a lot about that. I know that this film has bloody midichlorians, and like every single time they mention it, you're just like, oh man, you're just really lazy. You've just changed the word mitochondria into something else. But in this film, I liked just it wasn't like in the other films there was subtle politics, but in this film there was full on, I'm going to tell you now, this is a political film. It's a very politically driven film. I mean, they have like the Queen in there, they have the Galactic Senate, and I quite like that. I like the balance between that, and I like the balance between the action. They tried to make it less of a full-on action film and more into an all-round film, and I enjoyed that as a film fan.
Yeah, I think with the politics on this, I think in the Chris Taylor book, he mentions that Lucas wrote down a few lines for each film, but everyone knows that Lucas was always inspired by politics at the time. So the Empire from the originals is very much like
the
Nixon.
Nazis.
No, it's a lot more like Nixon in America at the time. And what I can't remember is if the Nixon stuff was also inspiring the prequels, or if the prequels was sort of a relativeness of Bush and all that sort of nonsense. So he's always taken politics into it. I think I don't really mind it, because it was always cool to see the Senate. I thought, although none of it makes sense, it was more or less just the design of all the aliens and creatures, especially at a young age. Like there's E.T. cameos in there. And then it gets interesting, but I always seen it as a sort of subplot moving towards Revenge of the Sith, because really, although these films are the sort of birth of Darth Vader, I see it more as the rise of the Emperor, and I always have done. And it's just the little intricacies of when Palpatine is in it for a few minutes in one, a few more in two, then number 3 he's let off the train and is unreal. But
he's brilliant in that film.
The politics stuff, it's more or less the sort of script deliverance is boring, but you kind of get the messages they're doing. But it's quite interesting, because Lucas could have easily sat back and done a whole action film, because he knows that's what people want. But he tried something new, and just unfortunately for him, it didn't pay off in this. It could have, but it just didn't.
To me, they almost tried to Star Trek Star Wars, because in the originals, it was very much sort of spiritual, and the Force was just in everyone, in every living thing. It was like almost Yoda was about to break into Colours of the Wind from Pocahontas. But then in this one, it does go very sciencey. It does go very political. They rationalise the Force in that it's sort of little particles in the bloodstream, and anyone with these is automatically a Jedi or has Force. Not everyone can become a Jedi. And the politics of there is a line in this movie from Chancellor Valorum where it's something like, "Will you defer your motion to express the validity of your actions?" That should never be in a Star Wars movie. That kind of dialogue, in my opinion. I don't hate the political stuff. Like, I think that that's quite interesting, and as these are prequels, you do sort of need to set that up, to get us to the point where we are in the originals with the whole Galactic Empire. But I just think it could have been truncated, it could have been shortened, it didn't need to be so on the nose with the dialogue of it. And those Senate scenes, I mean, I think everyone's in agreement mostly that those are some of the most boring scenes of the entire movie. And so the film feels very disjointed in that you go for these long, sort of vacuous scenes where characters are just being really boring, there doesn't seem to be any emotion from anyone. And then when things are just about to get boring, they'll throw in an action scene, like we have the journey to Naboo with the fish under the water. We have the pod race, which goes on for so long. After I was watching this again, it's like a 12 to 16 minute scene. And then obviously you get to the end. But I think if I'm going to sort of sum up this film in general, what my biggest problem with is it's kind of pointless. In like the grand scheme of the saga, really not a lot's accomplished. Like, they say they're going to train up Anakin, but we never see the training, and that's one of the biggest problems of Attack of the Clones, really. But I think if this one had have started off with a young Hayden Christensen just, training up, and we see that time, like just start off immediately where he's being taught by Obi-Wan, that would have been a better sort of jumping off point and effective episode 1, because as he's learning, you could learn about the Force and what it is to be a Jedi, and as a new viewer, if you're watching these in order, I think that would have been better. So as such, this is sort of like the Terminator Salvation effect, where you have a main character with Marcus, and in this Qui-Gon Jinn, who really doesn't enhance anything to either the prequel trilogy or the original trilogy, really. So it's just sort of like a pointless little film.
Yeah. Well, you've always got the... have you guys heard of Machete Order?
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of people online saying, "Oh, it's the best way to watch the films," and stuff like that. I've tried watching Machete Order before, and I've just thought, do you know what, I'm missing out on so much. I'm missing out on the Qui-Gon Jinn fight at the end. I'm missing out on the pod racing. Yeah, sure, there's a bit of politics and stuff like that, but I'd rather miss out Attack of the Clones than miss out this film. I prefer this film over Attack of the Clones, and I don't know. I still find it difficult to think now, if this film was released and there wasn't so much hype behind it, would it have done better?
If Terminator Genesis can make 500 mil, then financially this would still make 700, 800 minimum. Yeah. But the way I've always seen them is that it was just a mistake by. It's not having the kid. It was the sense that you've got 3 films.
Yeah.
And if you'd have had a 21-year-old, a 24-year-old, a 27-year-old cycle of Anakin rather than 9, 19, and 21, there's a 10-year gap, which, in all honesty, you could fill in with 3 more films. Obviously, never looked at it that way, but I think it was a mistake to have him at such a young age because he has to be Darth Vader at the end of it.
Yeah. And I think George Lucas realised that when he got to Attack of the Clones. I mean, I don't know how much prep time he had for these films. I don't know whether this was sort of his second or third draft of the script, or if he was pushed for time, if the studio was sort of bearing down on him to get it done. But to me, when you sort of look at the prequel trilogy as a whole, it looks like it has a lack of, in the words of the Emperor, a lack of vision. It seems very disjointed, and when you watch the original trilogy, although there are time gaps between each episode, it feels like a natural flow for all the characters. With these ones, not so much, because pretty much you get to Attack of the Clones and you may as well be watching a brand new movie. Not much carries over from Phantom Menace that you really care about, and you've obviously got a different actor playing Anakin, who's more or less got a completely different personality. So we don't see that transitional period. I know this is more Attack of the Clones territory, but in my opinion, that was one of the biggest mistakes of this movie, in that it should have started later down the line with an older Anakin.
Yeah, just touched on before, you said you didn't like the time-wise release. I'm sure I read that they were announced in 95, and originally they were planning on 97, 99 and 01 for releases. Obviously, that got massively pushed to 99, 02 and 05. So I'm wondering, in this sort of 2-year spell of production on the actual whole trilogies, if that's probably him deciding to have a younger Anakin, but it didn't work. But when I go back to Rick McCallum, he's the producer. He should have been telling George Lucas, okay, if he said no, Lucas would have sacked him, but Lucas never did, and this guy clearly didn't have any balls at all. He just wanted a production credit on Star Wars. Which is fair play to Disney for keeping on Dave Filoni, who did Clone Wars, because they've given him more creative freedom now. He's got the shows he wants, but again, he's doing something right with it, and he used to stand up to Lucas. So clearly, Lucas, if someone's telling him no, he'd listen. Spielberg did it. It's just a shame that for the most important one, no one did it, because the first one's the gist of everything. If one had been amazing, two had been crap, three had been good, I don't think there'd be so many people that were bothered. But I think because one was the one you were waiting for, it'd be like if Episode 7's terrible, but Episode 8 and 9 are good, it's going to hurt us more because we've hyped up Episode 7 more than 8 and 9.
Yeah, the equivalent to me of like a film like this would probably be Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, unlike Star Wars, I did grow up with the original trilogy of Indiana Jones, so when I got to that movie and I saw trailers and I thought, oh, this looks great, when I saw that film, it just broke me. Like, I got home and I was like almost in a catatonic state. I just like came back, just like held my trilogy box set of Indiana Jones, listening to the John Williams theme, just like rocking backwards and forwards at what I'd just seen. So, I completely get it. I completely understand how fans, would feel after coming out of this film. But I never sort of shared in that. But you were talking about sort of the yes men and everything like that. Absolutely, and when you watch that behind the scenes, it's almost uncomfortable, the level of the entire crew are really like that, because George Lucas isn't a people person, really, is he? He's very sort of to himself, he's very socially awkward, and I think it was it in the original Star Wars, one of the most infamous pieces of directing, tips he'd give actors is faster, more intense, and that was all he'd keep saying. He's not a good actor's director. But what he is a marketing genius, and when you see the people around him just sort of agreeing with him, it is annoying. But then again, on the flip side, could he have fired them? Did he have enough notoriety at that point to just say, well, if you don't like my ideas, take a hike? Because we know that throughout his entire film career, he always likes to have complete and utter control of his projects. And there's a scene where he goes to the editor, Ben Burt, and he's more or less just shadowing him through the entire process. He's saying, he's dictating to him how it should be edited, and it's like, this guy is the professional editor, this guy knows what he's talking about, he did the old Star Wars films, he knows his stuff, just let him work his magic. And then the most infamous scene of that that behind the scenes footage is probably when they have the initial first screening of like the director and Rick McCallum at the back, and there's just a shot of Rick McCallum sitting at the back just looking completely horrified at the film they've just created. He's just in stunned silence. So I think that did have a big problem of it. And honestly, I might be controversial here, I think that George Lucas gets way too much credit for the success of Star Wars. I mean, he definitely came up with the original idea of it, so congratulations to him, and how hard he worked on the original one on location and everything when everything was going wrong. But to me, even with A New Hope, and I love A New Hope, it's fantastic, but that is probably the one out of the original trilogy I watched the least. And the other two, Empire and Return of the Jedi, just feel like more complete films to me. I don't know, I've just always thought that, and the original draft of Star Wars, if you watch some of the deleted scenes, you start seeing the seeds of that political dialogue that got cut out of it. There's a scene where Luke is with Biggs Darklighter, and it was originally going to be sort of intercut between the opening with Princess Leia in the the rebel ship, the Star Destroyer, and they're talking about border disputes and taxation even there. So you can sort of see where eventually it would lead to with a film like, Phantom Menace and the prequels. Yeah, anyone want to join in?
I don't want to comment anymore because I really like this film, and I know that there's a lot of hate going for it, and I feel like it may just be because it was hyped up too much. And that's where my worries come in for the new film coming out. This is possibly the most hyped film of all time coming out. People are already predicting that even if it's a good or bad film, it will break box office records. It will be the highest grossing film of all time.
And this one did. This is still, I think, currently the highest grossing Star Wars film ever been made. Looking at on Wikipedia, it says it's made over $1 billion. Yeah, I think that's taken into the
3D
consideration.
re-release.
The 3D one that was released. Yeah, that alone made an additional 102 million.
But,
So
like,
I know that's not a
and
lot, but
people
considering this
still
came out
say
in
it
99.
wasn't as good as the other ones, and yeah, it's the highest grossing one. Nowadays, films will make money off of hype, and people will possibly go re-see them if they're, like, amazing. I really do hope this next film is as good as the hype that comes with it, and
Same.
I feel like I just keep on coming back to the fact that I feel like the other film would have done better without the hype.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm trying to think of two other things we could talk about in this one before we sort of close out our review, because we're almost coming up to an hour soon.
Can we
the
talk about the
effects
end of
and...
the lightsaber fight? You know, the end one.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that. To me, as I said, I love this fight, but I think most of that is down to the music. Without question of the doubt, the shining example in these prequels is John Williams' score. Some of my all-time favourite Star Wars music comes from these three films. In the first one, Duel of the Fates, and that sort of gets a reprise in Attack of the Clones when Anakin's searching for his mum, and then it comes back into it in Revenge of the Sith as well when Yoda's fighting Sidious. I really hope that song appears in Force Awakens. If it does, I think I'm just going to just fanboy out my ass in the cinema. But the soundtrack is fantastic in these films, and the music just goes so well with that end fight. The only problem is that we don't really get a sense of anyone's character, and it just seems like a lightsaber fight's just thrown in there because it's a Star Wars film, we need to have one. There's no sort of setup for it, other than the fact that Darth Maul's just sort of hunting these Jedi. And also the lightsaber that features earlier in the film with Darth Maul as well, it's a really short one where they're just about to get off Tatooine. I think that fight's equally incredible as well. Just some of the choices of shots in that are really, really cool. It's like the very extreme close-ups of the sort of capes billowing in the sandstorm as well. It looks fantastic. So everything with Darth Maul, I cannot fault in this film because it's great.
I have to say that I feel like the character comes into this fight when Qui-Gon Jinn gets killed. I feel like you can see... I have to say, from these prequels, the best character is Ewan McGregor across all of them.
Oh, yeah.
Like, his performance, he puts in everything into these films.
And Palpatine.
But
that's for different reasons.
Yeah, no, seriously, I do commend, like, his acting in these films, and he does a brilliant job, and in this fight you can definitely tell, like, a change of mood as soon as Qui-Gon gets killed. Like, he becomes a little bit more aggressive, which may not be the Jedi way, but that's kind of showing that he kind of passes that maybe slightly on to Anakin, even if he tries to kind of tell Anakin not to do that. You can tell that that's also in Obi-Wan. But over time he learns to control it, and that we'll move on to that with the other films. But I just have to say that, like, in this fight, it finally gains something to go on when Qui-Gon dies.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say, because I'll always remember this fight. I think it's a great fight, the whole thing. But it's when Qui-Gon dies, when the sort of red laser thing zips off, and Obi-Wan just charges out, and then he's going for him. You've got these great sort of wide shots keeping them both in, similar to the sort of Raid film, and it's just this like brilliant one-on-one duel. And it's the sort of character building of Obi-Wan, because at this point he is still a Padawan. He doesn't get made a knight until Yoda at the end, and you just see all the aggression, all the sort of anger in him, and that's just the rookie mistake. Whereas again, even before that, you look at Qui-Gon for the whole film. The way you see him, they stylize the Jedi as sort of monks, but he's not afraid to say no. They tell him don't bring in Anakin, he brings in Anakin, all this sort of stuff. So I think there is some good stuff heading into it. Yes, the fight's there because Darth Maul is just basically there to kill someone for Darth Sidious at that point. But as a duel, I think it's great, and then you kind of get the silence leading up to Qui-Gon dying as well when the soundtrack sort of stops. And I think it's great, and as character development, we say it's bad. We're right, Darth Maul should have stayed on for a few more films, but to introduce Obi-Wan, the sort of wise old man from Episode 4, because that's all they've really seen of him in 1999, for him to then strike down the face of all the marketing, it's a big thing in itself. It'd be like if John Boyega kills Kylo Ren. We don't want it to happen, but that's only going to do his character good. It's not going to happen. I can guarantee it won't happen. I'd bet my life that it won't happen. But I love the lightsaber duel, and before we round out everything, I don't know when you are, I need to say my positive point about why Jar Jar Binks is one of the best characters ever created.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Right, he's the most important because for 16 years since this, he was the first fully motion captured actor character. Yes, it's not the actual thing itself. But for what they did, granted, you'd seen bits of it in T2 done by ILM, exactly like, Jar Jar Binks. But it was the first actors one, whereas it's a shame because the one everyone thinks of is Gollum, because Gollum's the best of it.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
Jar Jar's the first. In all honesty, I don't know Lord of the Rings well enough. If Jar Jar had never been made, would we have seen a prosthetic Gollum or a CG Gollum? But that's the one credit I want to say about Jar Jar Binks, is that he was the first. And just look at the industry now. Motion capture's easily one of the biggest things that have been introduced over the past few years, and that's all down to that Phantom Menace. So that is why Jar Jar Binks is one of the greatest characters ever created.
And I do feel bad for the guy who plays him, Ahmed Best. I mean, if someone comes up to you, sort of like not a well-known actor, and says, "Do you want to role in the new Star Wars movie?"
Yeah.
You're going to be an idiot to turn it down, and that goes for sort of like every cast member in this, as well as like Hayden Christensen as well. And I really don't blame him. He was told to play that character, and he played it to the best of his ability, and what he was told to do. So it's really not his fault. It's not any actor's fault, I don't think, in these prequel films. And I mean, absolutely, yeah, motion capture. And I wonder if that was one of the reasons maybe this film was postponed, in that George Lucas was waiting for the technology to catch up. Because honestly, in all honesty, like all the effects throughout this movie, for the most part, they still hold up today. Definitely the environments, and even Jar Jar to some extent looks great in some scenes. So I guess that's just down to the skill of ILM and Skywalker sound, everything like that. Because the sound effects in this film are fantastic as well. Like the pod race scene, that's still brilliant to watch. So yeah, I guess we've talked I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours more about Phantom Menace, but we're conscious that we're coming up to an hour now. So do you guys just sort of want to round off on your final thoughts on Phantom Menace, where you stand on it and up against the rest of the Star Wars saga?
Yeah, it's not the best film. I'm not stupid. It's not the worst film. I understand everyone's disappointment after waiting so long, but at the end of the day, I grew up with this film. I liked it. I was still very watchable to me, and there's going to be millions of kids that are growing up with it right now as we speak.
I would put it in joint 4th place in my ranking. I'll probably say over the course of doing the reviews where they're being ranked, but I'll probably say this is in joint 4th place overall. It wasn't a bad film. People say it was a bad film, but that was because they were disappointed at the start. If you rewatch it now, remove Jar Jar out of your mind, you might enjoy it.
I can't remove Jar Jar out of my mind. Sorry. I will say that I appreciate this film for getting me into Star Wars as a kid. Without this film, who knows? Maybe I wouldn't be in this position where I am today, where I'm such at the level of Star Wars fan that I am now. But in all honesty, rewatching this film again a few days ago, it is boring, and I honestly don't think it's a good film. I think there are good moments in there. I think the effects in parts are fantastic. The cast, unfortunately, was wasted. I mean, you've got Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman in a movie together, and when none of them can turn in a completely stellar performance, to me, that's all down to the fault of George Lucas's writing. I think that the direction, the Yes Men team of this film, and the writing really let it down. If you're gonna watch the Star Wars films, I would still include it, in all honesty. Like, if some people just watch the original trilogy, but I think just to get a broader scope of it, you do sort of have to watch the prequels as well. I think I do prefer this one to Attack of the Clones, in all honesty, after rewatching the prequels again. But it is a very, very flawed movie with some very nice concept designs and creature designs. But in all honesty, I don't think it holds up completely well as a film on its own, regardless if it's a Star Wars film or not. But that's my take on it. But I will always, always appreciate Phantom Menace for being that initial spark that got me into Star Wars, and I'll never forget that about the Phantom Menace. So, yeah, that'll do it for our review of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. George, we'll have to try and get you back sometime whenever our schedules marry up, and we'll take on Attack of the Clones and the rest of them, if you're up for doing that with us.
I want to do all 7.
Yeah, and it'll be great if we can. I mean, I think I said, 12 days until the new one, so it's quite a tall feat to get them all done, but I think we can do it.
Yeah.
And Tayte, me and you can see if we can throw in like a top 10 of our favourite moments.
Oh,
as
we'll
well.
power through. We'll work it out.
Yeah, we'll sort it out. So yeah, also we're sort of gonna forget about recommended movie just for this month. We do want to keep this month exclusively to Star Wars because we think it deserves it. We're all hyped for the new one. I'm sure we've all got our tickets booked, haven't we? Midnight screening.
Yep.
We're going to try and get a review done that very night as well when we all get back. If we can sort of pick a time, get a review done. I cannot wait for that. The hype's building. Regardless of how many trailers we've seen and stuff like that, I'm definitely well into the Star Wars mood now. So yeah, that'll do it for our first episode. Be sure to rate, like, comment, subscribe. You can follow us at Facebook at facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We're on Twitter at cinema_savvy and at letterbox.com/cinema_savvy as well. Get involved, let us know what you think of Star Wars, let us know your favourite Star Wars film, what you think of Phantom Menace, anything you like, comment below and tell us what you think about Star Wars. So until the next review, which will be Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, thank you very much for listening.